From Harrenhal to Oh Hell Nah, this is Maesterminds. Welcome back, folks, to Nerdist House of the Dragon podcast. I'm Dan Casey, and once again, we are here to bring you the besteros that Westeros has to offer with our weekly breakdown of House of the Dragon Season 2. And while Episode 2 was Twin It to Win It, Hot D's third episode was... well, it was legally an episode. There was some good old-fashioned blood feuds, there were some creepy cursed castle capers, and then there was a truly baffling decision that we will get into in detail. Just you wait. But first, joining me as always on the small council is Nerdist staff writer, our resident lore master, and a certified poster boy, Michael Walsh.
Dan, usually this is where I say thanks for having me, but this week's a little bit different. I'm happy to be here. I don't know if I'm thankful to be here.
Look, sometimes the realm is in chaos, and that's very much the case this week. I think, as exhibited by the sweet artwork over your shoulders. What do we have there for people who might be listening at home?
Oh, I just in case this episode doesn't make clear, I wanted just a little visual guide, so I just came up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Your exhaustion level with Hot D is at an all-time high.
Yeah. When this episode ended, I didn't know, like, should I walk into the ocean? Mm-hmm. Was that the appropriate response?
I did consider it, but it was just, like, so much traffic at that hour of the day. Next time I'm at the ocean, I will probably just walk in as sort of, like, rounding up for the level of just frustration this episode provided. But we're going to get into it in just a moment, folks. If you haven't seen this episode yet, spoiler warning, obviously. Watch House of the Dragon Season 2, Episode 3. This is your one and only warning because we're going to talk about it, and to do so, we have to spoil what happens. Now, with that said, book spoilers will be kept to an absolute minimum, but if you haven't seen the episode yet, leave now before you hear something well and truly shocking.
Call it what you will.
Okay, let's get into it, shall we? Mikey, we kind of alluded to this, but what were your overall impressions of the third episode of the season?
Just one impression, bad.
Yeah.
Bad. This was, even before the final scene, I thought this was a pretty boring episode. It didn't really move much. It didn't really have many dynamic scenes. For as much as I loved episode 2, there was really not much going on here. A lot of scenes where they kind of felt like B scenes in an ABC story, except we didn't need B. We would have been okay going from A to C. Like that, for example, that scene with Rhaenyra and Massaria, like, we could have just jumped to her being on the small council. We wouldn't have missed anything. There was
scenes that could have been an email.
Like, everything that happened in that scene was implied already last week. Let's just go. Like, nothing happened there, and that was kind of the feeling of this episode. Nothing happened. It was all minor stuff.
Like, I don't know. The best thing I can compare this to is something that, not to date myself, but back when I was in high school, an anime came out that rocked the world called Naruto. And I was downloading fan subs each and every week. And at a certain point, Naruto, the anime, outstripped Naruto, the manga, which meant instead of getting new story episodes that were like blowing my teenaged mind, we got filler episodes. And this very much felt like a House of the Dragon filler episode for moments like what you're describing. There were some important bits that do move the plot forward, but then there was stuff that was just invented from whole cloth that, to me, just did not stick the landing at all. It stuck the landing worse than literally any child on Game of Thrones. I'm talking about Bran. I'm talking about Joffrey's brother, whose name escapes me. Tommen, thank you. Yes, it was truly the Tommen of episodes. Just, it seems like it's building to something important, then just walks right out the window. But we will talk about everything that did happen in detail. I don't want to just relentlessly crap on this episode because there were certain things that I thought worked well. I think this was definitely far and away the weakest episode of the season so far.
It might be the weakest episode of the series in terms of there have been episodes that I think had really huge mistakes, but that the stuff preceding it was really good. Mm-hmm. I actually think I think have been bad episodes because of singular scenes. I don't think there have actually been any bad episodes because of the whole episode. And then we got both this week. We got a bad episode and a really bad scene.
Yeah. Well, let's before we get into like specifics, what worked best for you about this episode? We're going to talk a lot about what didn't work, but was there anything that worked best for you this episode?
The Green Council. I loved that scene. New Hand of the King, worst person ever. Criston Cole, he has to run his first small council. It's a total disaster. We see the conflicting personalities when there is nobody to wrangle them, that they kind of just go off. They start infighting. There's no discipline. Cole is not, he doesn't have the expertise here to do what needs to be done. He is not a strong hand. Aegon wanted a steel fist. That doesn't mean a steel fist is good at handling things.
Yeah, it's not very dexterous or nimble, can't really adapt on the fly. Although I will say what worked best for me was kind of not a subtle moment, but subtle in the grander scheme of things. It was just a moment that I thought was very effective, and that's when Sir Criston Cole is chasing down Sir Gawain Hightower, the Queen Dowager Alicent's brother, who are meeting for the first time on the show. And all of a sudden, the sky darkens, and you see this little speck of a dragon fly across the sun. They realize they're exposed. And I thought that sort of chase sequence was done very well because it really communicated just how powerful and fast these dragons are. The way that she's able to swoop down, Baela's able to swoop down on her dragon and just narrowly misses them. I thought that was very effective in communicating the danger, and also It was nice to see like the aerial perspective there, the on the ground perspective, and just how challenging it might be to conduct these operations when you do have sort of aerial reconnaissance in this medieval warfare era. So I thought that worked pretty well.
There was something about that scene I really liked too. My hatred for Criston Cole burns so deeply in a way it doesn't for other Westeros villains like Joffrey or Ramsay, because Criston Cole chooses to be a villain. Mm-hmm. He is capable. And we see that here. He's smart enough to be like, hey, dummy, don't just be out in the open. We're at war here. And we see Sir Gawain, who has such disdain for Cole the first time they meet, kind of realize, like, this guy knows what he's talking about. He's capable, and now I'm indebted to him. And that makes Cole a better villain, because you can see he could have chosen a different path and been the honorable knight we thought he was when we first met him. So that also worked in that scene, I thought.
Yeah, if he was just a colossal dumbass, it would not do him any favors or the story any favors. Like, there's like the fact that he is so good at what he does sometimes. Like, sometimes he makes bad strategic plays, but he does have a good military mind and does have a good like sense of tactical awareness, which we definitely see at play in this episode. But we're going to talk about a different set of military minds to start things off the same way the show did. And that is with something that was bracken blue and red all over, an ancient enmity. The episode begins with what Game of Thrones and I think what House of the Dragon do so well, and that is just a long simmering blood feud. In this case, it's between the Brackens and the Blackwoods, and it culminates in a very effective hard cut from an argument to apocalyptic aftermath in a battle that is straight out of the book. So, Mikey, what do we need to know about this blood feud for the people at home?
I think the show did a great job kind of setting it up. These are the Hatfields and McCoys of the Seven Kingdoms. They are ancient families that live in the Riverlands who have hated each other for so long that that's basically what they're most known for. They exchanged reigns as kings of the Riverlands back in the ancient days before the Andals. They have tried to end this feud constantly. They have had marriages. They've had arranged marriages by Targaryen rulers to end the enmity, and it does not matter. They hate each other. They look for any excuse to go to war with each other. And as much as I would have loved to have seen the Battle of the Burning Mill, we did see the mill burning in the background, which I loved. As much as I would love to have seen, I thought it was a very effective way to kind of skip the B. Right? All the B scenes they skipped in this episode, yes. It was the most interesting one because it would have been nice to see a big war, but I get it. It's not actually relevant to to the story of the Dance of the Dragons. Just the fact that it happened is.
It was almost more impactful in a way because you see how quickly just an argument between sort of feckless teenagers in a field escalates into wanton bloodshed that, as we find out, wipes out the head of one of these houses, and just the river is just full of corpses. The mill is on fire. It was that like teed me up thinking, oh man, okay, this episode is going to be good. This episode is like getting into it, because for me, that's something that the show does really well, I think. And especially on Game of Thrones, they did really well, is communicate the visceral and horrific nature of medieval combat. It's not like this really expert, high stakes fantasy duel. It is gritty. It's grimy. I think a lot about Jon Snow almost drowning in that sea of corpses. I think it was the Battle of the Bastards. And there's that shot of him where the overhead shot of him just being piled high with corpses. And that's the same sense I got with this episode, where it really just kind of hits home how brutal this show is and how brutal the violence is. They play a lot of shock value where someone randomly gets beheaded or loses a limb, but I think this was ultra violent in a different way, and it did so without showing you how we got there, just the horrible aftermath of you cut to that same kid with a sword through his throat, his corpse by the riverside. So definitely not something I was expecting.
The way that the Green Council then responds to it is really effective too, and a big reason I love that scene so much, because they're like, well, is this really the first battle in this war, or is it two enemies looking for any excuse to fight? And if they are both slaughtered and dead out of the battle, I mean, you're right, it looks like both houses are annihilated, right? How can there be any
who's left?
Brackens
left? Who's left?
Although they are, just for anybody who doesn't know, they are quite big families, and when they talk about the Riverlands, these are not small houses. These are big houses with a lot of bannermen. But, Tywin Lannister says, Your Grace, I'm not even sure we can claim this as a victory. And Aegon goes, I don't care. It's war. Yeah. Great. Let's go. And we see how it's already being used.
He has such a surface level reading of everything that's told to him, especially when he gets any sort of bad news at all. And it's just, you really see that play out through the course of this scene, the course of this episode. I mean, we see it at the beginning of this with just bad decision after bad decision. We see Sir Criston Cole arriving late to the small council meeting for the Green Council, and when he's on the staircase, he encounters some different looking white cloaks than we've seen. People who maybe wouldn't pick up on the social cue to leave when Sir Eric is being read the Riot Act, and it becomes abundantly clear these are the same idiot friends that Aegon was drinking in the throne room with on the night of Blood and Cheese. They're now his sworn protectors, and it's funny to see Sir Criston Cole kind of stop and be like, I may break my oaths, but I at least have the decorum to not sit on the staircase in the Red Keep, sir. So it's just very silly to see how things are changing already. But what was your impression of this? Obviously, Sir Criston Cole, not high in your estimation, but what was your impression of this? His late arrival to this chaos. It reminded me of Donald Glover walking in with the pizzas and the rooms on fire on Community.
Well, I'm not sure that we're supposed to definitively know if it's a power play. I'm going to keep everybody waiting. I'm in charge now. Or if it's
interesting,
or if it's that, and he's also a little overwhelmed. I like that there's some ambiguity there about how he's feeling. There's no ambiguity about how he feels about these morons, these sycophants who have just been given sake. I mean, being in the Kingsguard, this comes up in Game of Thrones, where it used to be really sacred to be on the Kingsguard, and all of a sudden, the Hound is like, look at these jabronis, right? Sort of Meryn Trance. What is he doing with the white cloak? And we see it even worse here. These are not people who should be protecting anybody, let alone the king. And the fact that Aegon, it almost goes a little too far, I think, because Aegon just had his son murdered. The Kingsguard couldn't keep, and it does make me think, is he really this stupid? Although at one point in the episode, he clearly has a brief moment where he realizes this might have been a mistake. this was probably a bad idea. And then the next scene, he's out drinking with them, not being protected by them.
I don't even think that it's not even that I think he realizes appointing his friends to the Kingsguard was a mistake. I think he just has a moment where we're talking about the moment where he is being fitted with Aegon the Conqueror's armor, and Larys comes to manipulate him by planting the seeds that, like, well, some people are saying that, you're being very heroic and riding off to war. I think that's, like, super cool, your liege, my liege. But some other people are saying that this is actually a power play by your mom, the Queen Dowager, and your brother, who are, like, going to rule in your stead and make you look like a clown man. And it's just really hammered home by the super sycophantic Kingsguard that he's just appointed, who are just like, oh yes, my lord, this suits you. Like, you definitely deserve to wear one of the most impressive pieces of armor in Westerosi history. You should definitely ride off to war. It seems like a great idea. On second thought, discretion is the better part of valor. You're doing the right thing here. And that scene and this Green Council scene are the perfect distillation of what's going on with the Greens at large. You have this ineffective ruler who can't command respect and doesn't even understand what he's supposed to be commanding, who's just being run ramshackle by a bunch of schemers and manipulators. And the only one who seems to be trying to sort of cut through the noise is Alicent, but she doesn't seem to have any power now that Otto has been removed. It feels like her voice has been diminished, or they're taking Otto's absence as a power vacuum to fill.
Yeah, she raises a good point, and they all sort of recognize it, and then Cole just turns to the king and is like, what do you think? Doesn't matter what she thinks. And we see Larys continue to undermine not just Alicent, but Aegon, the whole Hightower Green clan here. And I was sitting there wondering, like, not only do I not know what Alicent is doing here, I don't even know why they have her here. She doesn't have an actual role on the small council. She doesn't.
Yeah, she's not like the Queen Regent.
No, it's. I guess it doesn't matter. He has his brother there, but at least he addressed it. Like, yeah, I want my brother here, and I'm the king, so I get to have him here, even if he doesn't get a little hockey ball,
a little Moncala bead.
Yeah, it is. You get to the end of this episode, if you know nothing about this story. So this is not a spoiler. I'm talking purely based on what we've seen. You watch this episode and you wonder, how is either side going to win this war? One side seems really stupid and run by a moron, and the other side seems totally incapable of acting. And how can you win a war when one side doesn't know what to do, and they're rash, and they're not thinking clearly, and they're getting rid of their best strategist and advisor, and the other side just refuses to do anything? And I think that's all clearly right there on the show without getting into what we know about the future.
Yeah, I think inaction versus incompetence is a definite fantastic distillation of these two sides right now, and both frustrating in different ways. I love how the sort of tension builds here a little bit between Sir Criston and Alicent as well, where people are you have several people like Ironrod saying, like, oh, maybe the last Kingsguard member died needlessly. And Alicent's like, that scheme was rash. Sir Criston says, the gods favor the bold, but they did not favor Sir Eric, she shoots back. It's this, like, little verbal sparring match that I think plays out very well. But then, like you said, Sir Criston just cuts everyone off at the knees by throwing the ball back to Aegon to make him feel like, well, you should decide this, right? Like, you're a man of action. You're a cool king that with loose morals, whoever wants to party with. And I think it's super effective. I love there's this moment towards the end of the scene where Aegon, he doesn't want to sit on the throne at home. And he's just like, I'm as fearsome as any of them. And then Ironrod slowly reaches for his cup to take a sip, like, sure, buddy.
The whole
sure.
council, the whole council, it's a very subtle but very funny moment where he says, and they're like, nobody make eye contact with anybody. Just this show is, as we talked about last week, they're very good at getting very genuine human reactions.
Yes.
Which are often funny because it's awkward and uncomfortable and people don't know how to react. And I think we've now probably exhausted all of the good things that happen in this episode, which all takes place in about 9 minutes.
Yeah, well, look, maybe we'll find a few other moments to talk about, but so the big crux of this is Sir Criston Cole wants to leave the castle. He wants to leave King's Landing, and he wants to go basically gather a host and gather support from the lords in the Riverlands, the River Lords, and win them to King Aegon's cause and make them pledge fealty, and then eventually claim Harrenhal, which is the largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms. So symbolic. It's very close to King's Landing. Don't want that to fall into your enemy's hands, but I have two questions about this. And the first one is this all part of what we saw Sir Criston and Aemond like plotting about with their map a few episodes ago? Is this what we saw them like secretly working on together, like sort of planning their conquest of the Seven Kingdoms in Aegon's name, you think?
Yeah, and he gets into this here, Cole, where he talks about we're going to pick up forces as we go.
Yeah,
and this is actually something that goes back to Aegon the Conqueror, who, King's Landing is called King's Landing because that's where he landed, and he has a very small force, but then he just starts going, and he goes through what we now know as the Crown Lands. That's just the area near King's Landing. I think you can all figure out that name, and they start picking up houses who bend the knee. And every step they take, they're bigger and they're bigger and they're bigger. And what we saw on the map last week was them kind of saying, like, we're going to go to these places here. These are black allies. These are allies of Rhaenyra who have sworn for her. We're going to subdue them. They're going to bend the knee. We're going to pick them up, and then we're going to keep going. And we got to get to Harrenhal, and we've got to get to the Riverlands because that is the key to winning the war.
So why are the Riverlands so important? Why do we need the Riverlands so desperately?
Centrally located, populous. I think Daemon says in this episode there are 40,000, soldiers that are here. That's a massive number. Yes. That is a massive, massive number. Going into the show, there was some question if that number was even close to being accurate, because it always seemed like the forces that were ever mustered there were always like more like 4,000, 6,000. But yeah, it's populous. It's also fertile. This is a good place to grow crops. Not only can you get a giant army here, you can feed them. And that's, we talk about total number of men and fighting. We saw Stannis, right? He burned his daughter because he couldn't feed his troops. And he wanted the snow to stop so that they could move. Like, if you can't move and you can't feed your army, it doesn't matter how big it is, you can't win a war. And the reason Harrenhal is so important in the Riverlands is Harrenhal, despite being in disrepair, I think they called it, is still the biggest castle in Westeros. It's the only place you can actually even put all of these people. It's where King Jaehaerys called the Great Council to name his heir, because everybody from the Seven Kingdoms was going to come, and they needed a place. In fact, it actually ended up not being big enough. They had to go outside the castle. So you want to control the Riverlands. To control the Riverlands, you want Harrenhal. And Harrenhal, it also has a symbolic meaning. If you control Harrenhal, you're more likely to get people to declare for you because they're going to see strength. So there's the actual physical reason to have Harrenhal, and also the, I don't want to say propaganda, but just, that hey, we're legit. You want to be on the winning side.
I almost feel like I would distrust anyone that's able to hold Harrenhal, because eventually it means they're going to meet the most gruesome end humanly possible, just statistically based on everyone who's ever lived there. Exactly. It's a cursed place, and we see that play out in the episode too, which we'll get to in a little bit. And yeah, I think you raise a great point there. We know all of this, and I think they do a good job at sort of laying that out expositionally, expositorily. I don't remember the appropriate adverb here. I think they do a good job of they give us a good info dump here. But I think when we see the overhead shot towards the end of the episode, when Baela spots Sir Criston and Sir Gawain and everyone in the field, that really does a good job at communicating, like, oh wow, the vastness of this land, how green it is, how fertile it is. Because when we saw it previously in Game of Thrones, we mostly saw it in the context of people walking along the King's Road, or, maybe seeing Cat Stark's just her dumbass brother, or seeing the Red Wedding. We didn't really see the benefits of the Riverlands. We only saw it as a place full of betrayal and bloodshed. So it's interesting to see, not that there won't be bloodshed here, which we got already, but we at least get a sense of its greater importance from a strategic point of view.
Yeah, and if people don't know, Harrenhal basically was finished the day Aegon the Conqueror burned it. Harren the Black from the Iron Islands, the Riverlands was his own thing for a long time, but then it became land that was swapped between the Stormlands King and the Iron Islands King. They would go back and forth, and Harren the Black built this massive castle. Nobody could get through the walls. He didn't account for dragons. Aegon shows up and says bend the knee, and he says no, you're not going to get in. Well, Aegon just flies down, kind of like we see. We see Daemon, which by the way is very cool. It's always very cool to me to see any Targaryen kind of recreate something Aegon did. We see how he came down. Harren and his sons are burned. The castle is left in this terrible state, but it's still so big that it's still really valuable. But it's been cursed ever since. Nobody who ever gets Harrenhal maintains Harrenhal. Something that was also true on Game of Thrones. That's not a spoiler because that's only if you try to hold Harrenhal.
Yes.
So
if you're just passing through, who knows? It might be fine, but it's not a spoiler to say that creepy things are afoot in that castle. We see that happen in this episode. But before we get there, you mentioned Harren the Black. Let's talk about the Black Council real quick, because I want to make sure that we touch on Rhaenyra and what's going on Dragonstone, because just as chaos reigns in King's Landing, a different sort of chaos is unfurling on Dragonstone. And mostly it is just stasis and people just getting impatient. And it is just so... You understand why her council members are frustrated, because Rhaenyra doesn't seem to want to do anything at all. And, they try to justify that this episode as her wanting to avert bloodshed and stop the war before it happens, which I understand. I can appreciate that motivation. But what was your impression of the Black Council sequences as we saw this episode?
As a sworn supporter of Rhaenyra, do something.
Yeah.
Do something. I don't even... How much longer do we have to follow the storyline of trying to prevent the war? At some point, right? Let's get to the fireworks factory. All right, Poochie, enough.
Yeah. Hey, if you want a fireworks factory, just watch Madame Web. That's where the finale takes place. The Pepsi and fireworks factory.
I don't blame any of them for being frustrated. Sir Alfred Broom might be a jerk, but he's right. A sword does not have value in its scabbard. They just sent an identical twin to kill you in your bedchamber. Mm-hmm. They killed your son. They stole your crown. They stole your throne. And on top of all of this, you know that your father entrusted you with the biggest secret/responsibility in the history of the world. When is Rhaenyra going to wake up and care about any of this? I think I wrote in my notes, how much longer is Rhaenyra only going to be a good person? When is she going to be a good ruler? Maybe never, right?
I'm crossing my fingers for episode 4. Because that's going to be the halfway mark. You can only be on the back foot for so long before it just becomes, why is anyone supporting you? You can only take the high road for so long before you wind up getting your head lopped off like Ned Stark. That was the biggest lesson they taught us in season 1 of Game of Thrones, is that if you're trying to take the high road the whole time, it's not going to go well for you. It's not even that she's taking the high road. Yes, she's not even playing the Game of Thrones.
She's not even playing.
Exactly. She saw War Games and realized the only move is not to play, and it doesn't play well on television. And you get a moment there at the beginning where they are burying Sir Eric and Sir Eric together, and Rhaenys talks to Rhaenyra about how Otto Hightower would never have allowed this. That means that hotter blood has prevailed. They understand that Otto's probably out of the picture, and this is Aegon or someone else. I don't know if they're making the leap to like assume it's Sir Criston, but clearly this is like Aegon's doing because this is the kind of like rash, impetuous thing that he would do. And I don't think the answer then is, let's find an adult to talk to, but that is the answer they pursue. And to the severe disadvantage of their entire position, because they repeatedly lay out how they don't have any troops, they don't have any support, all they have are dragons. That's the only strategic advantage they have over the Greens. They have, I think, slightly more dragons. Yes, and they have a navy. They can blockade them. They have a navy. But Corlys Velaryon, who we see this episode, doesn't seemingly want anything to do with Rhaenyra.
I can't blame anybody at this point. I don't want to sound glib, right? Like, because she is trying to do the right thing. The only way to win a war is to not fight it. This is a clear theme throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. And this is the theme of this episode, right? Like, it ultimately doesn't even matter why you fight. Like, the reason will be lost. All that will matter is the actual fight. I know we want to discuss that. But people have sworn to be loyal to you. They have put their lives at risk. You have a responsibility to them. All of those people on Dragonstone, on her Black Council, they have people sworn to them who have no say in this matter. She has a responsibility to protect them. So unless she's going to bend the knee, you have to fight. You have to fight. You have to do. How about this? You have to do something.
Let's talk about the thing that actually she decides to do of her own volition this episode, and that is to send her niece, Rhaena, on a mission of sorts. Well, actually, 2 missions. She sends her to take the wee baby Joffrey to the Vale, which is promised. That was something that was negotiated. They wanted to send him there in advance. But she also, and this was a little confusing, I think, because it wasn't made clear that it's a 2-part mission. Because at first, when I first watched, I thought, oh, she's taking the whole family and a bunch of dragons and dragon eggs to the Vale. So what's going on in this scene, Mikey? What do we need to be aware of in terms of where she's taking which child where and why?
Yeah, definitely not clear. I had to watch it multiple times because they're making a small change from Fire and Blood, but they also just didn't do a good job explaining it. Rhaena has been tasked with taking all 3 of Rhaenyra's youngest children. Joffrey, who she had with Laenor/Harwin Strong, is going to the Vale with his dragon because it was part of the deal Jace made there. But he's also going with his 2 youngest half-brothers, Rhaenyra's sons, little Aegon and little Viserys, that she has with Daemon. But she wants Rhaena, her niece/stepdaughter, to write some letters to Prince Reggio. We met Prince Reggio in season 1 in Pentos. He was the rich prince who offered Daemon and Laena the opportunity to live there forever. She wants to send those 2 boys across the narrow sea far away. And Rhaena thinks this is a punishment. I'm not a dragon rider like my sister who gets to be a part of this war. I have to go off and take care of little babies. But she realizes it's actually much more important than that. You are our last hope. I am sending you with 2 baby dragons and dragon eggs. If all comes to ruin here, if we are defeated, if we lose, you are the last hope to save this part of the family and come back and claim the throne that rightfully belongs to my sons and to you.
So am I crazy? In the book, I thought in the book she wound up going to the Vale. Like, I thought that she wound up waiting things out at the Vale for a period of time. But it's very interesting if she winds up also going across the narrow sea. I feel like this is them realizing they have too many pieces on the chessboard for a television story that they're telling across 8 episodes a season. But it is definitely fascinating that they're once again throwing in their lot across the narrow sea and maybe laying some of those seeds for years to come, sort of, foreshadowing as well what we see with another Viserys and Daenerys at the beginning of Game of Thrones, which is they had to flee across the narrow sea at some point and lie low at sort of at the mercy of these different sort of warlords, and not warlords, but I guess just rich bureaucrats over there, which there are so many.
They're planting. I'm a little worried about one of them because I'm afraid that they are. I'm happy to see Rhaena's story expanded. That she is an important part of this family. I'm very worried. There's been speculation. I try to avoid speculation about the show so I can come to it, but there has been some speculation based on a lack of casting news.
Right.
That they are going to give her a very important character's storyline. Kind of the way that Jorah Mormont got an important another character's storyline from the books on Game of Thrones. I think if they do this, it's a really big mistake. I think they will be omitting one of the best characters from the Dance of the Dragons. We can't get into it. I know it's frustrating if you don't know the book. We just simply can't get into it. It'd be too big of a spoiler.
Yeah.
But those of you who have read it know who I'm talking about, I think, when I'm mentioning seeds.
I'm crossing my fingers that we'll still see that character down the line. But, we do see some other unexpected characters this episode, which, let's cast our gaze away from Across the Narrow Sea and talk about the other thing that Rhaenyra is doing for her cause, and that is something that Daemon is actually doing because, he's like, I'm going to go do something. And he flew off to Harrenhal because he's going to claim Harrenhal for Rhaenyra and gather forces to come to their cause so they can have at least one soldier to fight their war. So let's talk about Daemon's spooky castle adventure, because this to me, at least, I think this sequence I thought was relatively well done. I enjoyed all the Harrenhal scenes. I really enjoyed the dynamic between Daemon and Sir Simon Strong, who is the castellan of Harrenhal and the uncle of the late Lionel Strong, who died there in a fire alongside his son / Rhaenyra's lover, Harwin Breakbone Strong. So let's talk about this. What were your impressions of the Harrenhal sequence, Mikey?
This is not a realistic world. Not when a dragon can show up on your roof and some tall, blonde-haired psychopath can start punching his way through. But he just, right. But
at least
Sir
you
Simon
hope it's
Strong
not like real life.
He's a real minor character that I've always loved. It could just be because I love the Strongs, minus Larys. But I just really liked that whole sequence. I liked, Daemon not wanting to eat, right? Like, he is maybe a good argument.
Yeah, I just want to be felled by poison peas.
Entire castles by yourself. Sometimes it helps to have a cook, somebody you can trust with you. I love the scene. I loved the whole thing about Daemon insisting on being called your grace, which is not. I was trying to.
Yes.
There aren't always hard and fast rules over who's your grace, and in real life, it's actually, I think, a little bit broader than we would. This is not a concern as Americans, you and I have, right? We don't live in little fantasy lands with kings and queens. We have a much. Yeah, we.
Yes. Give us a couple months.
So I don't think it's a big deal if someone calls Daemon your grace. He is the king consort. He's a prince. Like, he is royalty. He's been royalty since the day he was born. But the fact that he cares about it is a big deal, and I really like that. There's just a lot going on in the scene, and it's especially how we kind of learn that people who know what's going on realize Larys killed his father and brother.
Yeah, which was kind of crazy. He spells it out so clearly. It's like he is like no member of this family. How the hell is this castle going to catch fire? Look how wet it is here. And they really hammer that home. When Daemon's going to bed, it's just raining in his room. Like, it's not a place that would easily catch fire unless it was sabotaged by someone who specializes in arson. So I thought that was very effective. Also very effective, I think, was talking about the conflict between the Brackens and the Blackwoods. And that something that you raised is it's the theme of this episode about how sin begets sin begets sin. The sins of the father passed on to the son, passed on to the grandson, so on and so forth. It is just this generational violence and trauma that at a certain point no one remembers where it even stemmed from, or if they do remember, they're so blinded by just years of propaganda from their family and political infighting that they can't see a way to put that aside. And I appreciate that as a larger theme because I definitely think it's something that fits very well in the wider world of Westeros. I don't appreciate it in the context of the ending because I think it's sort of just such a ham-fisted way to try and deploy that concept. But we'll get to that. First, I do want to talk about another moment in here, which I just thought was so good between Simon and Daemon. And that's when Simon asks him a simple question. What happens if you're successful? He's like, well, we march on King's Landing and take the throne. And he's like, the throne? That's Daemon, why you're doing this? He's like, yeah, it's a big chair made of swords.
He is the chaos prince that show needed. He's a terrible monster, but he's such a good character.
Yes.
I'm so glad they cast Matt Smith. He's so good in this role. And there was, it might seem crazy to think about now. When he was cast, there were people who were angry. There are fans who really were invested in the rogue prince. He's important enough that he, out of all the short stories George R. R. Martin has released from A Song of Ice and Fire and various anthologies, he gets one to himself. He's a very beloved character in terms of being interesting. He's everything I wanted and more. He's such a good actor.
I think he captures all of the emotional turmoil of Daemon so well and adds a complexity there that I think elevates what is in the text. And I can understand why people may have raised an eyebrow at first. Matt Smith, phenomenal actor. They probably primarily knew him from I would say a comparatively goofier role in Doctor Who. But he has really risen to the occasion. I do still think that his blonde wig makes me laugh every time I see it on him. But I can put that aside because he always delivers. And he's arch without being over the top. But he also has these subtler moments too. And that really plays out this episode when he's having his nightmare sequence. And it's once again shot like a Resident Evil game. The way you have this sort of fixed camera over the shoulder, very claustrophobic framing. And then you have the shot that's sort of looking down at him diagonally through sort of a moonlit, rainy hallway as he's chasing whoever tried to break into his room in the dead of night. And then he finds out, oh, what's this? Maybe someone didn't break into my room. What's this fireplace here with, oh my God, young Rhaenyra sewing the head back onto the wee baby Jaharis? That's the kind of creepy stuff that I want in spades for this show. And I thought it was so well done.
Sequences that reveal characterization. I prefer the later seasons of The Sopranos. Oh, Tony's going to dream for 60 minutes? Let's go. More of those. What I thought was especially interesting, though, was I didn't know if it was a dream or a vision he had at the dying weirwood tree. Because we start in his room, and then it's clearly a dream, right? He thinks someone's breaking in, he goes out, he sees young Rhaenyra, so clearly a dream. But then he doesn't wake up. All of a sudden, we're at a dead weirwood tree.
I don't think it was a dream at all. I think it was a hallucination that he was having. From the moment he set foot in his room, it was a hallucination he was having that drew him to the weirwood tree. I think just because of the power inherent in the old gods in this world, that with whatever cursed energy suffuses this castle. And it's really hammered home by the creepiest new character we meet. They don't name her in this episode, but people who know, I'm pretty sure that's Alice Rivers, a character that, without spoiling anything, she is definitely leans a little more occult than your average serving woman at this castle. What I could not understand was her apparent
"You're going to die here"
accent in this show, where she's just,
"You will die in this place."
It's I heard that. My wife and I were watching, and we just burst out laughing because we're like, who is this? Who is this out of nowhere? And it's just morphed. And the actual line is, "You will die in this place."
You will die in this place.
But we've just morphed it into, "You're gonna die here."
Alice Rivers of
and I
House
just
Northern
can't.
Virginia.
I can't get enough of it.
Little inside baseball for our biggest fans.
Yeah.
We try to
oh my God.
most of the stuff we talk about for the show, but I was so confused by that that I messaged Dan and I was like, Dan, I need you to rewatch the scene multiple times because I'm 99% sure it's an American accent. And it wasn't, you're like, why were you only 99% sure? Because my brain just could not accept it. Like, of all the things I expected to hear on House of the Dragon, an American accent was not one of them. It's a choice. It's a choice.
You will die in this place.
And I wonder if it's just like a strange line reading or something, or like she was trying to be like ethereal and creepy. But wow, it just took me out of the moment in such a huge way. It's this really creepy scene that all of a sudden like the boogeyman looks over like,
Wisconsin? What's going on? Like, you should not be. You should not. You should not.
Do not know.
Which otherwise is really good. Being like, is she from Dearborn? What? Like, what? Where?
Yeah, she is the first juggalo to make their way to Westeros, a proud tradition. And because the juggalos hadn't really had a big foothold here yet, that's why we don't see Mushroom, because there's no fools here yet to join these, the Dark Circus, the Dark Carnival. Excuse me.
Erasure. But I do want to say, no,
yes.
no hope.
I'm hoping
no hope. If you think this has a happy ending, you have not been paying attention.
This is how it's going to end. It's going to end with. It's gonna It's the show's gonna end. It's gonna zoom out of the frame, and then it's gonna be Mushroom closing a book and saying, "At least that's how I remember it." Yeah, I know, but I would love if they already reused the theme song. Why not reuse the ending?
Alice Rivers, fantastic character. Can't wait to see what they do with her once we get past this nonsense. And she's played by Gail Rankin, who I love. I'm a Glow fan. Please, someday, Netflix, give us the final season that we were supposed to get. She is absolutely perfect casting for this role. I can't wait to see what they do. I just hope that it turns out she's actually from, the Riverlands, where she gets her name. She's a bastard of the Riverlands.
I am confident. I'm confident they will keep that in place, and I'm hopeful that this was just a strange line reading based on her being very far away and it being late at night, and maybe maybe something happened and they went the Madame Web route and they just had to ADR her for some reason.
You will die in this place.
It was a scratch line that somehow stayed in the show. But if they just have one random American, it might be a nice bit of flavor. Who knows? What was not a nice bit of flavor was the zest and the spice they decided to add to the ending of this episode. Folks, we got to talk about it. We got to talk about this ending that is not canonical to the book. And I know some of you in the comments before have said that we're being too literal sometimes with what we want. I love adaptation. I'm not trying to be literal. I'm happy when I see how they bring a lot of these moments from the book to life. And I'm happy when I see new additions. I thought this new addition was just catastrophically stupid. And I thought it really kind of undermined the stakes in a huge way. So Mikey, what I wrote down here is my question for you is, what were they thinking? Why do you think they included this? Is this possible? This is like the gas leak season of Community? Come on, man.
This kind of broke me. This really kind of broke me.
I know.
I know. So stupid. I've been trying to think of more sophisticated ways to describe the scene, but I just keep coming back to stupid. Stupid, stupid, stupid. This is the very worst of what this franchise can be. This is the final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones bad. It is when Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are at their best, they are telling an authentic, honest story. They are going where the story takes them. And that is what always made Game of Thrones such a standout. It's not that it was shocking. It's not that it killed off characters or was graphic or anything else. Other shows have done that stuff. But they weren't as good because they weren't earned. Game of Thrones is a story, A Song of Ice and Fire. Martin's story is one where you have magic and dragons and ice zombies and political backstabbing and family problems. So they when they come together, they lead to places that most shows wouldn't want to go, right? Like, this is how you end up killing off Ned Stark, your main character in season 1. A typical TV show would have kept him around. A typical TV show would have kept Pedro Pascal's Oberyn Martell around because he was amazing, right? They would have just been like, oh, we're rewriting the story. We can't kill this guy off. He's too good. Mm-hmm. And then, obviously, as we all sadly know, Game of Thrones just stopped telling a logical, honest story in its final 2 seasons, and it started reverse engineering spectacles. And this is kind of, those of you who have been with us in season 1 know my issues with some of the big moments in the first season. I didn't like Alicent's misunderstanding. I didn't like Aemon's accidental killing of Luke. But the dumbest scene was Rhaenys coming out of the dragon pit and not just burning all of them. That was spectacle for the sake of spectacle. It wasn't logical. It was really, really dumb. This scene is not a spectacle, but it's even worse than that because it takes the 2 main characters and makes them both look so incredibly stupid. So incredibly stupid. And the only reason to do that is not because the story or the characters bring them to that moment, but because the TV show wanted to get those 2 actresses who have fantastic on-screen chemistry, wanted to get them back on screen together, even though the story did not want them to be there. It did not make sense. This is a moment that is generated from nonsense, logic, reason. Throw it out the window. Characters, throw them out the window. This is astronomically stupid. I think it's absolutely unforgivable. And I don't know if they can recover from this because I don't know how we're supposed to walk away from this moment ever thinking the 2 of them are anything but morons.
To me, and I will say, Olivia Cook, Emma Darcy, they're both phenomenal. I think that they do great work with really sloppy writing. And this, I put the blame here squarely on the writing because it just doesn't serve the plot. It doesn't do anything except forestall a conclusion that every other character on the show has already come to, including both of them. That war is already here. I don't understand how dressing as a septa and sneaking into a house of worship to have a secret knife point conversation with your best friend / stepmom / arch nemesis is going to change anything. And to what the most egregious thing, which like I can forgive a lot, to then really double down on making sure that Alicent knows that she perhaps misheard Viserys in his final moments. That's needless. Just let that ambiguity stew. Let us as the audience know that this is what's happening. Yes, Alicent doesn't need to know this. She needs to have the conviction that what she's doing is right for her family. She, like the same with Rhaenyra, she needs to have the conviction that what she's doing is to reclaim her birthright. And I understand that she has this these moments of like, should I bend the knee? Like, am I doing the wrong thing here? Am I going to create untold suffering in exchange for like the health of the realm? And maybe this is how they're like, well, she needs to be convinced that, that Aegon really isn't the prince that was promised. And it's the most ham-fisted way possible to deploy this idea. And I'm just, God, it was so frustrating. It was just so frustrating to watch. And I've watched this episode twice now. And it was worse the second time because I knew it was coming. The first time when I realized what was happening,
no way
I was
they're actually doing
oh
it.
no.
No way.
No, they're not. They're not doing this, right? How? No wonder her council is frustrated with her if she just leaves Dragonstone by herself under the cover of darkness. There's zero security in King's Landing or in Dragonstone, apparently. No one notices that she's just gone, just taking the slow boat to King's Landing. Jesus Christ, man. It was really, that's fine. Really frustrating.
So I just want to specifically address why I think it's really stupid. Does the scene do anything? Yeah, it does, right? She gets to learn that she almost certainly misunderstood her husband, and now she's probably going to reflect on, did I hear what I wanted to hear? Okay, I get that. The problem is the scene should never happen because Rhaenyra, even if she 100% believes Alicent's letter is sincere, little Jaehaerys just got his head chopped off. Your son got killed by her son. And even if you think Alicent still believes it, when you show up, you have no idea how she's going to react. Her natural instinct as a protective mother, if nothing else, might be to detain you so we can end this war right now. If Alicent really wants to end this war, all she has to do when she gets up from her little candle spot is go tell her Kingsguard, bar the gates of the Sept, bar the gates of the city. Rhaenyra's here, war over. We don't have to kill her, but the war's over, right? It is the thought that Rhaenyra, who is not stupid, or at least was not until this point, there's a difference between inactivity, right? Inaction versus stupidity. She's not stupid. She's just been hopeful, right? Let's give her the best reading of the situation. She's been hopeful that she can avoid the bloodshed. She is putting her children's lives in danger when she goes here. She is putting all of her supporters' lives in danger when she goes here. And, they try to have it both ways. Well, what will happen if I scream out? Well, they'll take me, but I'll kill you first. Okay, but then she just gets up and walks away? Like, the scene can't even... The scene tries to create logic it can't possibly maintain because there's no way to do it.
It makes Rhaenyra seem naive in a way that sort of undermines a lot of the character development they've done previously and just didn't ring true. And, maybe, who knows, maybe this is just another nightmare that Daemon's having in Harrenhal, because that's the only way I can sort of mentally stomach this particular ending, because I think it's just such a low point for the season. And perhaps the series. Look. The good news is it can only get better.
Dan, I'm not being funny.
Yes,
I'm actually really worried that we are officially in final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones territory. If they could do something this stupid,
I don't think so. Though
bad,
they can do something this stupid. But to me, this is them realizing that we need to start the brutal bloodshed and war around the halfway point of the season, which is next week. Next week is the halfway point of the season. This has been a lot of maneuvering and maybe dragging their feet a little too much, I would say. They wanted to play up the shock of Blood and Cheese. They wanted to play up the shock of Sir Eric trying to infiltrate Dragonstone. And now they're okay, well, we can't start the war this episode. We still have some other positions we need to move people into. So we'll buy ourselves some time and create a scene with Rhaenyra and Alicent together. I think that it is going to be I think that's going to be the case where it's just, okay, well, we're about 10 minutes short of where we want to be, and we need something to pay off Rhaenyra's story this episode and tee up Alicent this episode, when they really didn't need that at all. I feel like you could have just done more with Kristen Cole in the Riverlands or Daemon and Harrenhal. There's so many things you could have done. It was just unnecessary. And to me, it's just very much them spinning their wheels until they come hot out the gates next week with something that'll be a little more focused. And just sort of this episode has been them closing the door on the chance of peace. We knew that was never an option, but it's, the characters need to accept that, okay, I've exhausted all of my resources and attempts to avert this crisis. I guess we have to do war for the next 5 episodes. So I think that's what's going to happen. That's how I feel like it's playing out. I think it was the clumsiest way possible to communicate that. I think you could have. I think it was already clear based on all of the conversations that both of these characters already had independently this episode. I don't think they needed to restate the premise for us of, yeah, it sure sounds like we're about to have a dance of the dragons. Sure seems like this war is about to become less than civil.
This was them.
Really frustrating.
They decided,
and
we want to get a dragon beyond the wall. Let's figure out how to do it. Oh, we're just going to send a bunch of idiots without any horses to go.
Yes.
To go find the dead. That's what this was, and I mean.
I forgot about that.
I think that the first 6 seasons of Game of Thrones are as good as TV gets because that the last 2 seasons are as bad as it gets. I really do think that. I'm not one of these people who's going to come around on the last 2 seasons like some. They're really bad. It's a different show. This was that version of the show, and this is not, like you said, we do get accused of being too literal. Sometimes I think that's really unfair because there's a misunderstanding about Fire and Blood. People think because the sources for Fire and Blood are not always reliable, that we don't know any specific details. That's not true. Some of the sources that they use are specific. Like, for example, like I didn't like we disagree on this, but I didn't like Aemon accidentally killing Luke. But that was an actual change they made. That wasn't something that was wrong in Fire and Blood, because Aemon said in front of an entire court of people, including maesters, who immediately sat down and wrote it, that he was going to go kill his nephew. That was a choice the show made. So not everything they do is, you're being too literal. No, sometimes they're just making changes, which is fine. It's an adaptation. They made a lot of changes to Viserys in season 1 that I absolutely loved. I actually defended, I say this all the time, I defended almost every change they made through the first 8 episodes. This is indefensible. They created out of whole cloth, and they created out of whole cloth for the worst reason, because they just wanted to. They just wanted to. It is not the show, the franchise, its predecessor. They excel when they are honest, when they tell an honest, authentic, sincere story. This is the complete opposite of it.
Yeah, this was engineered in a lab to advance the plot, but not even advance it. It just kind of. It's just like a speed bump, and then we flew through the windshield instead. But
besides
with
that,
all
Mrs.
of that
Lincoln.
high praise out of the way, it's how was the play? Let's we've been dragging things out, so let's wrap things up and talk about who is your MVP for this episode, Mikey?
Now, the MVP are people who hate spin-offs.
No MVP?
I don't know.
Okay, well, that is all right. I'm going to give this MVP to an unlikely candidate, and that is Sir Criston Cole, because I think he makes the most interesting choices this episode. And it's, not in terms of my favorite. I think he just makes the most interesting choices in terms of how he advances the plot, and we see how he interacts with these other characters, and we see his relationship with Gwaine Hightower, we see his relationship with Alicent, we see him sort of trying to make up for a foolish bit of subterfuge with a bit of sort of like saber rattling, trying to win some military accolade and try and earn back his good graces, which doesn't seem like the best use of the hand of the king to immediately deprive the king of any counsel he might provide. But he is my MVP just for those reasons, because I thought he was the most interesting in terms of what he did.
Dan, I can't.
Otherwise, I'd probably have to give it to Simon.
Not for the reason
Simon
you think.
Strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the episode.
Oh, really?
This is yes. As
is this his haircut?
As an
is
admirer,
is that
and
why?
Possessor of great hair, one of the only things I care about in the world. The only redeemable quality about Sir Criston Cole was his hair, and he went and got a stupid haircut and ruined it. He cannot be the MVP if he's.
He should kill that barber.
Hair off so he could look like that.
Aegon should execute the barbers of King's Landing next, because whoever betrayed his hand of the king with that cut was not doing their best. Well, speaking of people that Aegon had executed, we got a nice little, not Easter egg this episode, but we got a nice reference to what happened previously. We saw what appeared to be cheese hanging from the wall with a raven plucking out his eyeball. That's how they get their third eye. They have to find one in the world and acquire it. Everyone knows that. But what are some other Easter eggs or moments that fans might have missed this episode? I mean, for me, we did see the first official canonical use of a term that we sort of alluded to sneakily last week, and that is dragon seed, a term used for bastards of Targaryen descent. So, Mikey, what do we need to know about this, and what do we need to know about old Ulf that we meet down on the Street of Silk?
Yeah, very exciting for this actually. I was like, ooh, exclamation point notes. Yeah. Ulf the White is an important character, and it should be clear he's an important character, considering it looked like last week he was just some guy walking around seeing the bodies hanging, right? But we learned that he is Ulf the White, and he calls himself a dragon seed. The Targaryens are not immune to doing what everybody else does, which is just going around having bastards. and they refer to these bastards as dragon seeds. This is a term we more often hear on Dragonstone, where there are lots of dragon seeds because that's where the Targaryens had their base. What's really interesting here, though, is that Ulf claims specifically to be the bastard brother of King Viserys and Daemon Targaryen. He says that his father was Balon the Brave. Balon the Brave was this is not as complicated as it sounds. King Jaehaerys, the conciliator, I know. The good king, he's the one we saw at the beginning of the show, who needed an heir. He had many children. None of the boys lived. His second son was Balon. Balon was briefly his heir. He was beloved. Everything says he would have been a great king. He had his appendix burst and he died. This is why Jaehaerys ends up kind of ultimately calling a great council, because he really doesn't have anybody. So Ulf claims that he is Balon's son, and my first instinct was, how dare you besmirch Balon the Brave? but Balon in Targaryen fashion married his sister, but she died pretty young. So Balon has plenty of years in his life where he is either just single or a widower, and he doesn't remarry, so he didn't have to necessarily cheat on his wife. But even if he did, it's not like there aren't other people in Westeros in real life who are doing that. I don't think it's important if he really is the bastard son of Balon, but it is important if he genuinely believes it. And we see a lot of good characterization here in a very brief scene. Ulf is gregarious. He's well liked. He likes to drink. And he seems to not exactly have the strongest personal ethics, because he's talking about how his nephew Jace is the real heir to the Iron Throne. And then Aegon walks in and he's the one who's like, "All hail the king!"
Yeah, that's such a good moment where he's just like, because they walk in right as you hear all the sound cut out, and he's like, all hail the king. And thankfully, Aegon is none the wiser, did not pick up on anything that he was saying. And that whole sequence I thought was very well done as well, just seeing him going from having this moment of like introspection of like, am I being manipulated, to nah, I should just go out with the boys, and like, I know I told them that they have vows to uphold, but I'd rather get drunk with them instead.
And by the way, in a little fairness to King Aegon, the pretender, kings do this. The royal family does this with their Kingsguard. Jaime Lannister talks about going out with Rhaegar. Sir Barristan Selmy talks about getting drunk with Rhaegar. The difference was Rhaegar was not in the middle of a war when they were doing this. They were just like hanging out during a time of peace. Aegon just had assassins sneak in and kill his son. Like, that's the difference here. Ulf, they talk about Ulf's hair as proof that he is a Targaryen. If I did not know anything about Fire and Blood, but I was watching the first 3 episodes of the show, I would focus on the fact that they mention his hair. That's it. I'm not connecting any more dots for anybody.
Yeah, maybe worth a rewatch of some of the stuff we've seen so far, or just a re-listen to some of the stuff that we've discussed so far. It might see things in a new hue. But let's talk about some of the other elements of this episode. We talked a bit about Larys becoming the formal master of whispers. I thought that was an important development as well, especially because Viserys did not have one, or didn't see the efficacy of having one, perhaps to his detriment, but he was a peacetime king. But I think it's very important that Larys is now formally elevated to a position of power.
He doesn't have to ask to come to the council meetings. He's on the council. And in the same episode that she doesn't say it, but it's clear that Mysaria has now become the Master of Whispers for Rhaenyra. So this is moving the war. The war is getting closer to the actual blood and fire, but it's also getting into more espionage and that kind of stuff, which is good.
Yeah, it's already, that's how it's already played out, is through like backroom dealings, assassinations, and just like unexpected treaties and diplomatic overtures. They need a spy master. That's become the one thing that's become abundantly clear to both of them, is that they need a spy master, because this is not just being fought with 2 armies lining up on a battlefield. This is total war. and war is fought across not just battlefields, but also by winning hearts and minds. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Was there anything else that stood out to you in this episode that you wanted to mention before we wrap things up?
I'm not sure how important it is, but I thought it was interesting. Poor Helena said she forgave her mother. That was a pretty heartbreaking scene where she doesn't even think, she's saying like, oh, I'm not even upset about my son because I don't really have a right to be upset because the small folk lose their kids all the time, and I'm kind of privileged. It's very, very sad. Sir Gawain Hightower, this is a very different storyline for him. He's coming to King's Landing now. He's meeting Sir Criston Cole for the first time. In Fire and Blood, Sir Gawain went with his father many, many years ago to King's Landing to live there. He knew Sir Criston Cole for years, and he actually got a very important job at the start of the Dance of the Dragon. Sir Gawain is given the position of second in command of the City Watch, which is very important to the Hightowers because the City Watch, they literally got their gold cloaks from Daemon when he was briefly the commander of the City Watch, and they're very loyal to him. And we saw it with Blood. When Daemon went to him, like Blood had, needless to say, no love for the Hightowers. So I don't know if they're just kind of abandoning that storyline, but it was interesting to see that they did not have Sir Gawain in that role. It's
interesting because with Blood we see him refer to Daemon as commander. Like there's no hesitation in their minds, and I bet that would hold true for a lot of them. In their minds, he is still their commander because they were this. Like ragtag in the book, they were this ragtag bunch and they were out of control. And it wasn't until Daemon sort of took the reins and gave them gold cloaks that they became this more organized organization. And we saw that a little bit in the first season where Daemon was a bit overzealous with his punishment of the criminals of King's Landing. But it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. And I do think we could still see Gawain maybe step into that role after perhaps his military adventures with Sir Criston Cole, assuming everyone survives in one piece. If they come back to King's Landing, he might want to stay there, be close to the action. What's a way to keep him and give him a position of importance? Okay, you're going to be second in command of the City Watch, and that way you'll have a connection to what's going on with the castle, but also be something that's not too much responsibility for the Queen Dowager's brother, but still a position of importance. So,
I did like that they used Sir Gawain. I almost brought this up last week. I thought the show was not doing a great job of kind of reminding viewers that Criston Cole comes from a nothing house.
Oh, yeah.
There are no real notable members of House Cole, and that's why his ascension to the Kingsguard is such a big deal. And then to being Rhaenyra's sworn protector, Alicent's sworn protector, Lord Commander, Hand of the King. This is a meteoric rise. And it was really, I thought it helped to show not only him a little, like he's all high and mighty, but at the same time, we see a little doubt, right? And then to have Gawain Hightower kind of put him in his place in the way that only a fancy boy can in Westeros, only to then later have to kind of eat it when Cole saves his life. All very good stuff, and good job. I'm glad they finally did that.
I'll say the actor playing Gawain Hightower, certified fancy lad energy. He is a very fancy boy indeed. They found a perfect person to play him. All right. Well, folks, that is all the time we have for this episode. That is a wrap on our breakdown of House of the Dragon, Season 2, Episode 3. As always, thank you so much for joining us. We will be here all season long, and we'll also have plenty of other deep dives into Hot D lore waiting for you over on Nerdist.com. Mikey, where can people find you on the internet to send you a digital raven?
Burger Mike, all one word, at both Twitter and Blue Sky, but more importantly, they can find me at the greatest website anybody ever created, Nerdist.com.
All right, and you can also find me on said website or on other websites at Dan Casey or at Osteoferocious, like the bone disease, but meaner. Anyway, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. In the meantime, tell us, what did you think of this episode? What was your favorite moment? Let us know in the comments below, and for the latest and greatest in the world of pop culture, make sure you stay tuned to Nerdist.com.